Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir. Sego. We'll begin this meeting with a moment of personal reflection. Council Gardner, will you please lead us in the singing of our national anthem?
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command, car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee peoples, the Mohawks of Akwesasne, the original keepers of this land. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Mayor Justin Towndale.
Present.
Councillors Claude McIntosh.
Present.
Dean Hollingsworth.
Present.
Sarah Good.
Present.
Councillors Elaine McDonald.
Present.
Sid Gardner.
Ici.
Denis Sabourin.
Present.
Todd Bennett.
Here.
And Councillor Fred Ngunjo.
Présent.
Councillors Dupel and Ibert send their regrets, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any additions, deletions, or amendment to the agenda? Councillor McDonald.
I'd like to pull number 1 out of consent, please, the communications.
And if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor, we're going to move communication item number 1 to be dealt with immediate following the presentation on the same matter.
Okay. Any further amendments? Councillor Ngunjo.
I would like to pull item A.
Further amendments? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended, please? Councillor Sabourin, Councillor Gardner, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Any disclosures of interest for the meeting this evening? Okay, seeing none. Move on to adoption of the minutes. Can I get a motion to adopt the minutes from our meeting of May 8th, please? Councillor McDonald, seconder. Councillor Ngunjo, any discussion? All in favor? Carried, thank you. Can I have a motion to go into committee of the whole, please? Councillor Good, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Presentations.
We have one presentation this evening, Mr. Mayor, and that is the 2023 Annual Housing and Homelessness Plan. And with us this evening are Lisa Smith and Melissa Morgan, who are going to be presenting together.
Ms. Morgan, familiar faces around the table. I hope the technology gremlins don't get you tonight.
Yeah, so do I. I think we've got it worked out. So good evening, Mayor Towndale and Council. Lisa and I are pleased to be here this evening to present to you our annual housing report. We've included in the council report this evening the full report that is going to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. We won't go through the report in its entirety, but we do want to highlight some key slides. Menno, if I can get you to go 2 forward. So essentially this report is a result of ministry requirements for us to complete initially a 10-year housing plan, and then at the 5-year mark we had to do a 5-year update. But annually we need to provide a report to the ministry on our accomplishments year over year. So this report in part encompasses that. But Lisa and I were very fortunate to recently attend a housing and homelessness symposium put on by the Association of Municipalities Ontario. And so we thought it was important to bring some of that information to council and put into this report as well. So the next slide, again, we're just providing some key messages from both the mayor and the warden for the ministry for our global report. Next slide. This provides an overview of our department, both from a housing services division and the housing programs division. Housing services is largely the housing stock that we have and rent to citizens, and our housing programs are typically the programs that are funded 100%, mostly by the ministry, to provide additional services to residents within the community. On the next slide, what we've done is, it's a little difficult to tell from here, but we've provided you with an overview of really how much it costs to administer both housing services and housing programs. And again, you'll see on the graph on the left, that's housing services, and the revenue for that is primarily generated from tenant rents, as well as a huge municipal subsidy. So the cost to run the stock and to provide units to tenants is pretty much almost a 50-50 split between municipal subsidies and tenant revenues, with a small component still coming from federal side. In terms of our housing programs, this is the side that is largely funded by the province or the federal government. And those are things like our Ontario Renovates program, our housing prevention program, and those types of programs that we offer to individuals. On the next slide, we've just provided you with a photograph of the housing continuum. This is something that we have provided to council many times in the past as well. And on the next slide, we wanted to start providing you with some statistical information about our area.
Great, thanks, Melissa. So this information's identifying the impact of core housing need in our community. And we spoke about this issue last year as well. So there's different ways you can gauge affordability. The most accurate measure is what we call shelter to cost income. And this is where really for housing to be truly affordable, no one should be paying more than 30% of their income to housing costs. So that's rent, utilities, all-in insurance, shouldn't be more than 30%. So that becomes a measure of what we call core housing need. As soon as people go over that 30% threshold, we start identifying them as being in precarity around their finances in terms of that shelter to cost ratio. So what we saw this year was based on the most recent census data that the core housing need has appeared to improve. We know this is an inflated number. This is coming from CERB. So this is impacts of where we know that people actually were living at a basic income, and you can see the positive effect that had on core housing need. I would hazard a guess that if we were to pull this data from the next census, it probably will not look this positive. So I suspect it's a short-term measure. The other piece of data that we did put in, just to give you a sense of the impact of that and the difficult choices people are having to make when it comes to housing versus basic living expenses, is to put in the cost of eating report data from the Eastern Ontario Health Unit. So what you can see is if you are a single person living on OW, by the time you pay for your housing and your food, you're living on negative $423 a month. And that just gives you a sense of the impact for a family of 4 on OW. Again, only $353 a month would be left after paying for housing and food. Again, so you can see not a lot left there for any incidentals or other expenses that may come up. Next slide, please. This slide basically starts looking at things like vacancy rates in our community, where core housing need appeared to improve, vacancy rates got significantly worse. And what this tells us is how much rental stock is actually available within a community to be able to be actually lived in. So what you can see is the Canadian rental vacancy rate is sitting at 1.9% currently. That's a drop from 3.1 to 1.9. For our community in Cornwall, we are currently sitting at 1.3. So you can see ours is even worse than the national average, and this will again give you a sense of the struggle people are facing when they are looking for housing. In terms of our wait list data, again, that's holding as well. That's not getting better or worse. It's just staying at that number of households, which again gives us a sense of how many people are waiting for affordable housing in this community. But what we can tell you is this list does not capture every single individual. So despite our best efforts to really promote the centralized wait list, not everybody who needs affordable housing is actually on that list. Next slide, please. So this was some of the data that we saw come out of the AMO conference, which was talking about the cost to end homelessness. We have provided this information before that just gives you a sense of different investments in housing and what's the most cost effective, and it appears still to be the best way to deal with homelessness is to build housing. And you can see it's the most cost effective in terms of return on investment. The other thing that we did include in terms of data was in the top left corner there, where we started talking about things like what is the impact of homelessness on other systems within our community. And what you can see is there's significant heavy use by individuals who are homeless or housing insecure on our healthcare system. Again, just rippling out the cost of this issue throughout the community. And last slide for me until we turn it back to Melissa is the idea about housing as a human right. So what's happened recently is the Waterloo region were taken to court by their homeless population around being able to provide shelter, safe, affordable access to housing was their core concern. And what actually ended up happening was they wanted to remove, the city did want to remove an encampment, and the municipality lost that fight based on a charter right argument. So what's happened is it's become very clear to those of us working in housing that essentially this idea of housing as a human right is now starting to stand up in terms of charter law. So the key impact for us is, I think, that last kind of bolded statement in the obligations under the right to adequate housing is that all orders of government have a duty to advance the right to housing within their powers, resources, and areas of jurisdiction.
On the next slide, again, this is nothing that will be new to council. The approach that we have taken within our department to address some of the things that Lisa has already spoken about is a housing first approach. And essentially, a housing first approach is a philosophy that basically puts housing at the core of everybody's needs. So in order to stabilize somebody's health, you need to stabilize their housing. In order to stabilize somebody's employment, you need to stabilize their housing first. And so that is the philosophy that we are adopting within our own department as well, with any of the programs that we're offering and any of our future considerations on housing revitalization and regeneration.
Next slide, please.
Yep, that's still me. So one of the other things that we're also looking at is shelter diversion. And again, that is based on a housing first philosophy. Shelter diversion goes in conjunction with that because what it does is it helps support more secure, permanent, long-term housing, whereas a shelter often is meant to be short-term. There are other things that come with shelter as well that perhaps may be of a negative connotation with respect to wraparound services. Sometimes individuals, once they go into shelter, it's hard for them to break out of that shelter environment because they continue to work through they're continuing to face barriers that they're unable to work through because the shelter system is not able to support them. And so again, we're moving with that housing first philosophy also to a shelter diversion philosophy, which looks to permanently house individuals as opposed to looking for short-term housing solutions.
Great. So one of the core tools you can use to make housing first a reality is what we call a by name list or coordinated access system. So a by name list is essentially built on an enumeration of the community that we do to go out and find every person who's homeless. The intention is to know them by name, to know what support services they need, and to also assess their chronicity of homelessness. So again, I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anyone that the longer you're homeless, the harder it is to support you and move you from homelessness to housing. So the coordinated access system actually uses the by name list as a fundamental component of that. So if we can get everybody identified in terms of what their issues and their needs are and what's the best suitability for housing, we then encourage the housing system to respond to that. And as the service manager, we're able to have a lot of influence in that area. A fundamental core piece of this is the support system network that we find within our community. So agencies like Canadian Mental Health or Inspire, who are working with folks with mental health or addiction issues or a variety of issues, would be critical partners in making this work. And again, it's based on the housing first philosophy because We know who they are, we know what they need in terms of housing, we get them housed, and then we start to support them, which is a different approach to homelessness than a lot of communities and historically we've taken, which is, you know, you need to go into treatment, you need to get drug and alcohol support, and then we'll house you. This is the whole idea of we're just gonna house you and then help you figure out how to get stable. Built for Zero, again, comes out of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. It's a movement. So it takes that idea of the coordinated access system and the by name list and says we as a community are going to commit to reaching something called functional zero. So if our coordinated access system is functioning well, we will be able to reduce levels of chronic homelessness with the ultimate goal of getting to what they call functional zero, which means you're never homeless for an extended period of time without the response system supporting you to get housed and to stay housed. So eventually, we would probably like to move our community to being a Built for Zero community, again, to put a stake in the ground to say, we'd like to end this issue.
So one of the things that we have also done, and we provide council with an update every year, is an update to our housing revitalization plan. In 2019, we engaged a consultant because we really didn't know where to start and we didn't know what we didn't know, so we thought it would be best to put all of this into a report. The revitalization report has provided us with a roadmap of where we need to concentrate our efforts, specifically from a more permanent housing option. And so it was adopted in 2020 by council, and we continue to move through the recommendations of our housing revitalization plan. And on the next slide, part of the housing revitalization plan looked at a number of properties within the city of Cornwall and the United Counties, areas that could be developed, and we were very fortunate through the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing to receive social service relief funding. And so we now have 3 properties that are being developed, all funded in part by the Social Service Relief Fund. You're going to notice, if you haven't driven by 9th and McConnell, the ending stages of that development, and we hope to have individuals move in sometime in July. Our Pitt Street North, we are just at the stages of looking at construction with that. And this evening, council will receive a report on architectural services for our development in Morrisburg. So now in terms of our housing plan with respect to the ministry requirements, again, this was originally a 10-year housing plan that the ministry mandated all service managers create. And at the 5-year mark, we were to revise or review that plan to see if those recommendations still made sense. Again, we hired a consultant to help us go through the exercise of really taking a deep dive into our housing and homelessness plan. And so we shifted from, we shifted our plan more to a community housing plan. And so we have created a number of vision statements that involve the community throughout those visions. And what we're going to be presenting to you next are updates to those 4 community visions. And this slide just shows you an overview of the 4 community visions that we adopted in that housing plan.
Okay. So I'll be talking about our results around Community Vision 1, which is people experiencing a housing crisis are housed or sheltered. Next slide, please. Some key highlights, and I think it came to light when I was talking about the coordinated access system and the by name list, is our strategy 1 updates. We are actively working to make sure we're either bringing partners together collaboratively or getting on the right community planning tables that are talking about housing and homelessness as issues within our community. So of those 4 bullets there, you can kind of see the results of that. The other, I think, one of the other highlights is under strategy 2, which is part of our work to implement the by name list. We continue again to actively engage homelessness system partners, and that'll become even more evident as we make that list more robust. And thirdly, we are in the initial kind of feasibility study, planning stages of looking at doing a housing and homelessness symposium for our community to, again, to bring everyone together, to bring in some thought leaders around this issue, to start sharing and encouraging our community, again, just to look towards addressing the issue of housing and homelessness.
Next slide, please. So Community Vision 2 is people who are currently housed but at risk of becoming homeless remain housed. And on the next slide, this vision largely revolves around many of the programs and services we offer at 340 Pitt Street. So again, as I mentioned, we continue to implement the recommendations of our housing revitalization plan. The funding that we've received for the province for our housing and prevention programs is largely for housing loss prevention. And you can see from April 2022 to March 23, we assisted 1,561 families with some type of assistance, whether it was rental arrears, utility arrears, what have you. We have also implemented a Circles program, which is, it's basically a mentoring program. And so we get individuals in the community who will come and mentor clients in receipt of Ontario Works to help them break that cycle of poverty and move into more sustainability. We've partnered with United Way and the Canadian Mental Health to undertake a homelessness system mapping exercise. Many of the strategies in this section, I will say, had been paused during COVID, one of them being our employment services initiative. And since the time that we drafted this report, the Ministry of Community, Children and Social Services is now removing employment services from the service manager, and it's going to an independent company. So employment services will no longer be delivered through our office. However, we do intend to continue those conversations with the new service system manager and how we can best assist clients that might be living in social housing. And again, as we transition, we fully intend to support this new service system manager in bridging those gaps.
Next slide, thank you. Community Vision 3 is suitable existing housing stock is maintained. Next slide, please. So in terms of our effectiveness in this area, we are working with the city to actively get the building condition assessments updated and completed for our own internal housing stock, as well as all of that for our existing community housing providers. BCAs allow us to effectively plan for capital updates and improvements and take advantage of any sort of government funding pots that we may see come to our community related to that work. In Strategy 2, in 2022, our Ontario Renovates program continues to be very actively accessed by the community. 54 households were assisted with that, which now brings us to a total of 831 households who have received support to renovate their homes to be able to remain there. In terms of Strategy 3, we are bringing online roughly 130 affordable housing units within the community. We're pretty actively building, so I think we should take pride in that because not every community in Ontario is able to do that. And as part of that work, we are aligning our new builds to the energy efficiency standards, part of the climate action plan, partially because it's the right thing to do around green energy, but it also is in the best interest of tenants and fees they pay around utilities.
So Community Vision 4, the supply of appropriate housing is enhanced. In the next slide. The biggest initiative we have going on here, sorry, next slide. The biggest thing we want to highlight here is that in September of last year, we created a collaborative. We've called the collaborative A Home. And what this collaborative, the membership of this collaborative, there are representatives of every county within SDNG as well as the city. And what that collaborative is doing is taking the recommendations out of all the individual housing plans, including the ones from the Mayor's Task Force, and looking at the ones that are common to all 4 plans, and then tackling those initiatives or those recommendations as a collective so that we can look and better approach housing from a regional perspective as opposed to just a City of Cornwall lens or just a County of South Glengarry lens example. So this collaborative has been very active since September. They meet once a month, and there have been a number of things that have come out of that collaborative. However, the biggest thing and the thing that is the biggest priority for us right now is probably on vacant lands, and I'm going to let Lisa talk about our efforts on that.
Great, thanks. Next slide, please. So as Melissa was talking about the A Home Collaborative, again, can't state enough about how fantastic this partnership is. We think it's the only one of its kind potentially in Ontario, definitely Eastern Ontario, where everybody's kind of come together to say this is an issue we want to work together on. In terms of the work of that group, we've just recently wrapped up identifying vacant municipally serviced lands across the region, and we're going to be going to councils across SD&G to ask if that land can be set aside for community housing so that we have land to build on in the future. What we're finding is it disappears quickly, and if you don't protect it now, it won't be there in the future to build on. So as part of that work, after we do that ask, we will then be moving into the development of a long-term development plan. The first thing we will be doing is pre-qualifying that vacant land, so doing necessary environmental testing, archaeological assessments, just to make sure that it is suitable for building. After that, we will be creating site plans for those properties, just again to get a rough idea of what kind of housing could we put on there, how many units. What we're finding is there isn't a lot of notice when provincial and federal programs roll out. So the more we can be ready with an off-the-shelf solution for to build community housing, it'll just work in our best interest to be able to secure that funding. The other third and final piece, we'll be doing a financial costing just to get a sense of, to build those units on that land, what are we looking at in terms of a rough estimate in terms of preparing for that.
So that, in summary, is our report. Certainly, we're open to any comments or questions from council. We will be presenting this to County Council at their meeting in June as well, before we submit this final report to the ministry.
Great, thank you. Before we go to questions, just can I have a motion to receive the presentation, please? Councillor Good, Councillor McIntosh, questions, comments? Councillor Good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few questions and just one small comment. Great presentation. You are doing wonderful, wonderful work, and it's really great to see the ball rolling. One of the things I want to learn a little bit more about is the community housing units, how this works for both the landlords and the tenants, because it was just mentioned briefly, but I wonder if you could share a bit more information.
So when it comes to community housing, there's two different ways we work. So there is our own internal units, which we are essentially the landlord of. But for the private market units are typically secured through a rent supplement program. And again, we have three different types of rent supplement programs. So there's an RGI program called the Commercial Rent Supplement. There's our Homelessness Prevention Rent Supplements. And then there's the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit, which is, get a provincial portable housing benefit. All of those work with private market landlords. Usually what happens is there's an agreed upon cap to how much rent we'll subsidize up to. That cap is usually determined by Canada Mortgage and Housing's average market rents. Sorry, a lot of acronyms going on there. So when we look at AMR, that's where they'll say, okay, like partner, you can subsidize up to that level of rent. To be honest, those levels of rents are still below what people can get in the private market if they just went out. But the benefit of working with us around a rent supplement is it's guaranteed income. So when a unit sits vacant, when it's the commercial rent supp, we'll pay for that vacancy period to basically protect the unit. And again, it's a bit of a partnership with private market landlords. We, in this community, have done quite well in terms of working with that stakeholder.
Wonderful. I think it's a really interesting program and a way that we can kind of slow the bleed, you know, the loss of affordable housing that exists. I don't know how much data we actually have to be able to capture that, but I mean, I know I used to rent an apartment for like $650, beautiful 2-bedroom apartment with a nice little view. You know, times have changed. That building I know has since changed ownership, and the person I'm going to tell you probably bought it for 8 or 10 times what the original owners had paid for or had bought it for. So I think anything we can do to incentivize landlords, small landlords in particular, to keep their units and not sell them, because then the new owners with the cost of housing are forced to increase their rents. Like, you have to pay for it. It's an investment. So thank you. And I hope that we can like bring that forward and emphasize that program, because I really enjoy it. I have a question about the how does one access the HPP, and has Circles started yet? We had the privilege of having you come and present at CAS, and it was a great presentation, but I wasn't sure if the ball had, if it had actually started.
So So maybe I'll take the HPP question, and then I'll let Lisa tackle the circles question. So HPP, again, that's just the acronym for the fund that the province is giving us. And so anybody who wishes to access this program makes an application with our office next door at 340 Pitt Street. You can go online, you can see the criteria for the HPP on our website, or you can come into the office and you can speak with somebody in our office about what is a qualifying item. Again, it's not a limitless pot of money, so an unlimited pot of money. So we do have to put parameters around it in terms of income levels and asset levels and the number of times you can access the benefit and the maximum amount you can access as well. But as you've seen, it does serve quite a number of individuals, even with those parameters. So they can apply next door, or they can go online and see what the eligibility criteria is.
Great.
Yeah. And then circles.
So circles, we're very excited that our first group has actually started. So we have 6 individuals who are going through the first phase, which is called Getting Ahead, which is all about getting people ready to think about how they might transform their lives. So we're having pretty good success so far. The response has been really positive. So again, we're hoping success will breed success, and we'll be doing more of them in the future.
Wonderful. Well, that presentation was very informative, definitely. May I continue? I have just a couple more questions. Last year, I had learned about a forgivable loan program available in Leeds, Grenville, and this was for small landlords to construct secondary suites. And I want to say it was a $25,000 forgivable loan for affordable secondary suites. I wonder if this is something that you're aware, familiar with, if you've heard any of the results, because they're like our neighboring community, right? So it seems like an interesting, creative way to kind of increase our housing stock. Is that something that we've considered or explored, and would we want to?
Absolutely. So I will say probably late 2019, it was something we were planning for in 2020 to explore expanding some of the programs out to landlords. Everybody knows what happened in 2020, and we've been basically, like everybody else, in survival mode. So there have been fewer programs that we have launched during the last 3 years. Certainly it is still something on our horizon that we want to look at those types of partnerships as well, and engaging stakeholders in that respect as well. So again, it may not just be limited to secondary suites. It might be might be helping out a landlord who has a duplex or a fourplex and making some energy efficiencies with affordability for the tenants in mind as the trade-off, as an example, or maybe even a rent supplement agreement. So it's not that we haven't thought about it. It just, life took a change to the left, and so we had to accommodate that. We're moving back into the right-hand lane now, so we're hoping that at some point in 2024 that will probably be back on our horizon for discussion as bringing that full circle again with our plan.
Wonderful. I think there's a whole bunch of creative solutions that we can all test out and just hope whatever we do works. Okay, my last question is in regards to regulatory tools to help foster affordable housing development. It mentions in here zoning provisions, and I'm just wondering what kinds of zoning provisions would foster affordable housing development.
So I might look to the CAO to help with this, because I know the official plan does talk about some options for affordability in terms of, going through the zoning. I will say sometimes what happens is when a private developer speaks with us and they realize what the affordability rate is, because it's not a huge project where they can offset higher rents with lower rents, sometimes it doesn't become a very palatable endeavor for them, because the other rents would have to be so high to offset the affordable. But there are some other initiatives that have come out with some of the programs we have where those private developers are following our affordability level. It would be the high end of our affordability level, but with some of these programs, some of these newer, larger buildings that are being constructed will have our, what we call high end of affordability, but it's still considered affordable.
Okay.
But I defer to Mr. Boileau about zoning.
Mr. Bullock?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. There are a couple of examples that I can give in terms of what has happened to allow for more residential development. Of course, Bill 23, which has allowed for, sort of the traditional residential 10 zoning or a single family zone in many municipalities is really non-existent. Everyone has the right now to add an additional unit, both within their home or in fact also in an accessory building on the property, which tends to be a bit more of an urban, a larger urban situation. But we are seeing some people who are adding second units to their properties, and that's really what we're trying to achieve, is that, you know, there are approximately 20,000 or more units in the community. I suppose less than that in terms of properties, but it's easy to achieve a whole lot of units if more people are to take on these projects. And again, it can happen in any of the residential 10, 15, 20 and higher zones. The other is that when we did the zoning bylaw most recently, a lot of the commercial zones that are in the urban locations, so the traditional commercial 11, commercial 12, which were, for example, Pitt Street North, we've changed that to be mixed use zones, so that they're not just commercial zones, they accommodate residential development. So more development, infill development, or additional residential units within commercial buildings, possibly both residential and commercial, or strictly residential also.
Thank you for providing all of that detail. And thank you so much, ladies, for answering all of my questions. I have one point of feedback, and I hate to criticize anything about this presentation because it's great. I know that this template has been used previously in other presentations. I find it very difficult to read with the background pictures and the white and the very, very small fonts that I have pretty good eyes, and I had to, thankfully I could zoom on here, but zoom in really, really big. So I'm not sure if there's, to make it more accessible so that people who with worse eyesight than myself are able to read it all easily. That would be just a little point of feedback. But thank you, everything's wonderful.
Councillor McIntosh.
One of the advantages of reading from a hard copy, I could even read it without my glasses on. Great presentation. You guys give a course on how to breeze through 15 to 20 pages in your 20-minute allotment. The couple of questions, I'm really astonished with the incomes and what's left at the end of the week or month, I guess it is. You say one person on Ontario Works, monthly income of $863, and two just basic things, housing and food, and a lot more goes on in life than that, and they have a negative 423. How do you survive on a negative 423?
Frankly, people are struggling too. So that's, I can tell you anecdotally, even when someone can access an affordable unit, it can still be a struggle. It's why the 77-unit, one-bedroom apartment building was built, essentially to help us start to make more units available for singles or couples. So what I would say, Claude, is people are probably making really tough choices every day about how they're going to survive, or are they going to eat today, pay utility bills, take care of dental needs for their children.
Yeah. I just did some quick math here, and a family with an income, that's about $23 an hour, works out to about $43,000 a year, and I've heard people say, well, that's pretty good. But when I include things like housing and food, I'm coming up with about $23,000. And I haven't even started yet with all the other things that cost of raising kids and whatnot. So housing is really a big issue. It really becomes a social problem too, I would think. Kids raised in that kind of environment have some challenges in life, I would think. Would you agree with?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think certainly I think those parents are doing their best, right, to
Oh, no
make
question
things work. But I would say definitely maybe don't have the same kind of advantages that a more middle class to higher middle class income might have.
Anybody who has sent kids to high school know the peer system, how it works, the designer jeans and everything else that goes with it. That a lot of parents just can't afford. Moving on, you said approximately 77 individuals indicate they were homeless during this survey. When I think of homeless people, I think of down by the Rideau Center in Ottawa, the people that sit out there with their looking for a handout, some loose change. That's not always the case, is it?
No, through you, Mr. Mayor, what we see is, I think in a rural community, it's more hidden homeless. So people are couch surfing. But that being said, we do have individuals in this community that would be living rough, maybe living in tents, could be in close to the river, in parkland you might not see, or out in other areas of our region that are living kind of in their cars or tents or things like that. But in a rural community, you typically see a lot of hidden homelessness where they might be able to couch surf for a week and then they're maybe in a motel for a week and then over with another friend, so.
Yeah, I think I told you this story before. I was driving down, and there was a bus ahead of me, a school bus, and it stopped in front of a motel. And two little guys got off there, and I thought, well, they must be the owner's kids. They went to a door at the motel, knocked, and somebody let them in. I went, wow, yeah, you're going home to a motel room. Moving on, in the 9th Street McConnell thing, unit, we talk about 24 rent geared to income, 24 median market, and 28 market. Why wouldn't they all just be rent geared to income?
So maybe I'll take that one. As I spoke earlier with Councillor Good, the mixed market. So what we're attempting to do is a number of things. One, include an all-inclusive community. So it's not going to be just individuals who need a rent subsidy. There are still individuals out there who are living on that border of poverty or precarious housing that may have that job that you had mentioned, $23 an hour, who still need affordable housing. So we wanted to do mixed income, but we wanted to do a mixed community so that we're trying to dispel any stigmas or myths about community housing and just trying to build inclusive communities.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember Glenview Heights when it was built. And it was sort of like, let's put them out there. We're out of sight, out of mind. And, we don't want them mixed in with the regular people. And it had disastrous effect.
And that's we're trying to dispel that. It's not the way of the future in terms of segregating a population and building something specifically for a particular demographic or population. We're trying to be inclusive in everything that we build and design.
So we've created 77 units. 77 people are going to in. That means there are 77 houses now vacant or residences vacant.
Potentially.
What I'm saying is that it gets things sort of moving.
It does. So through you, Mr. Mayor, what it is doing, so we currently have a number of individuals on our overhoused list. So overhoused means there could be an individual or a couple that are residing in a 2, 3, 4 bedroom unit that we may have. But because of family growing up and leaving home, they no longer require that size of apartment, and so they go on our overhoused list, and so we're moving some of those individuals into some of our units. They're more appropriately housed, which is now freeing up a larger unit for families. But in essence, yes, some other individuals coming from the private market, but we are also endeavoring to look at housing some of the individuals off the by name list. So some of these people are in fact homeless right now, and we will be moving them into a tenancy.
One last thing is that you talk about getting an inventory of vacant properties. I want to tell you, eight years ago, the council of the day, Kinsman School became available, and there was some debate about buying it. And council of the day went ahead and bought that property with the idea we now have shovel-ready property. And guess what? 7 years later, bingo. You're hitting the ground running. So it's a great policy if we can assemble this land. I would think in a city like Cornwall, it could be tough sometimes finding that property.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it's tough finding the property because not every property is is right for community housing. And so one of the things we're also trying to endeavor to do is not to do scattered units. Scattered units are more costly to operate on an ongoing basis. So for every duplex we may put on an appropriate size lot, again, we have to bring, send somebody from maintenance, and it's upkeep on that. Whereas larger scale, and when I say larger scale, it could be 5 or 6 duplexes on a piece of property. So we're looking for vacant land of an approximate size so that we can get a minimum number of units. Obviously, while densification is at the heart, it's also respectful of the design of the neighborhood and the community, so that we're not, what fit on 9th Street is not going to fit somewhere else and vice versa, right? So.
Well, I when we had the board, Cornwall Area Housing, I sat on the board with Councillor McDonald, and it was really a real eye-opener. Great job. You're doing a great job. Under the, not a lot of people know what you're doing, but being on the board, I recognize the great job you guys do.
Thank you.
Councillor Gardner, then Councillor Ngunjo.
The report was awesome. Even though at my age it's hard to read this stuff. As I was going through the report, you talked about land being available, vacant land being available, and there's a huge piece of property behind Giant Tiger off Sydney Street on the east end. Who belongs to that property? Is it ours? And that would be a perfect spot to build.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we do not own it. We have inquired about it because we have properties on 6th Street and on Adolphus. It's what we would, at this point, would deem unaffordable, because the owners that we've been speaking to would probably sell it for fair market value, and at that rate, it would probably go into the private market, and we'd end up in a bidding war. So in part of the reason for us looking for vacant lands that are municipally owned is it lends to the affordability of construction and development. If we don't have to pay for land, that is the biggest part of any development, is the purchase of land. So if we can get municipally owned lands across the region, then that's the biggest part of, biggest stumbling block right there. And we've automatically taken out a huge cost to development. And it then in turn makes it affordable for us to pass on to renters.
Asking the question, I assumed that it could be probably our property, but it's not.
It's not,
Thanks.
no.
Good report. I really enjoyed it.
Councillor Ngunjo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, through you. Thank you very much for your report. It was very informative, a lot of work, a lot of information. But I have some questions that I would like to discuss with you, if it's possible. I would like to ask you, because you're dealing with those people who are trying to find houses, what is the common point, the common problem that those people are facing?
Wow.
Well, yeah.
Do you want to tackle that one? And, yeah.
I'll start, because I think to narrow it down to like the common one, through you, Mr. Mayor, sorry. I think to narrow it down to one is difficult. Common problem, affordability. It is really income to the cost of shelter, to the cost of living. I would say there are other social problems that may accompany someone who's looking for affordable community housing, whether it be struggles with mental health or addiction or things like that. But again, if you were to ask them if that's why you're homeless, they might say something more like family breakdown, things didn't go well. Or so I think really it does come down to folks are struggling to afford housing. Like the data we showed you are making tough decisions every day between, can I get housed and pay for my rent and my utilities, or am I buying food this week?
Okay, thank you very much. Do you think increasing the employment in our community can help or decrease this amount of people?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so it's kind of a double-edged sword. So increasing employment and getting individuals into the workforce is great, and that's what we aim to do. But as we bring more individuals into the community to fill those vacant spots, then the crisis and the pressure on housing increases. So, I mean, we're not the only game in town, nor should we be. It's really a community effort. And it's, again, back to the affordability where the jobs that may be out there right now, somebody's not going to go out and buy perhaps a single-family home worth now an average of $400,000. I will say that was the big detriment in our area with COVID, was that, as house prices were kind of creeping along the province, they were just hitting us when COVID hit. And so we felt the increase of housing affordability exponentially as compared to the rest of the province. And so it comes to that housing affordability, as Lisa mentioned. Yes, you want to get individuals into the workforce and get them stable, but again, it's the affordability piece where the jobs that are there may not be the jobs that will get you, the cost of a single family home right now. And so subsidizing housing is where we need to approach that.
Thank you very much for your answer. Through you, Mr. Mayor, another question. I see that the province is subsidizing a lot of houses. Did you see any increase of the subsidies since the province decided to build 1.5 million house since a few years? Did you have any increase of money or?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly the Social Service Relief Fund over the pandemic, there were 5 phases of the Social Service Relief Fund, and we utilized 3 of those phases for development. So that's really, driven that development from that perspective. In terms of the reinvestment by the province and the federal government, as operating agreements are ending and the federal subsidies are ending, the federal government is reinvesting money into other programs. So our Ontario Priorities Housing Initiative, the Canada-Ontario Community Housing Initiative, so they're reinvesting funds into there, but they're not, the level of investment is not matching the cost to build a unit. And so we have the flexibility to utilize some of those funds for future development or future improvements to our existing stock, but the commitment of funding is not there to meet the development needs.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I, through you, Mr. Mayor, a last question? This is a vision for 2025, and we are talking about building new houses. And I wanted just to ask you, did you think about refreshing some houses? For example, Le Village, can we think about something available there that we can refresh and use to increase our number of units?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So that would be something similar to what Councillor Good was talking about earlier, and perhaps assisting private market landlords to bring units up to more energy efficient units, so windows and doors, so that we could increase affordability by decreasing sort of what we would call energy poverty. So the more energy, or the less energy efficient a unit is, the more a tenant is paying on energy expenses and taking away from other costs. So it is something we had considered pre-COVID, something we will look at again probably next year, but it's just not something that we've been able to take on right now, considering we've got 3 developments on the go right now.
Thank you very much. Very nice presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, touching that last question of Councillor Nunjo's, I couldn't help but think that our CPIG programs, and unfortunately, when they come for ratification here at Council, they're always just passed as consent items. We never hear about them at this table, and that's kind of an essential piece to show what the private market is doing and benefiting from in terms of city programs, comparable to what you're doing for social housing. So there are good things happening here too. But I just want to commend you very much for the optimism you bring to all of us, I think, because for so long, we would hear reports about homelessness and felt, I'm sure everybody else felt it too, that the situation was more hopeless than anything. But you've gone forward so quickly, utilizing those programs, taking the opportunities, and building all this building, which is it's really it's encouraging. But the last note kind of let me down when you said that the feds in the province, that they're not keeping up. So even though everything we're doing, we seem to be getting ahead, but we're very much lacking that investment, if we're going to keep up this pace. So I hope we get it, because we really need to keep going. Now, one thing kind of dismayed me, and something you said, you talked about your employment services, that your department, the service manager, is no longer responsible, that this employment services is being sent out to a private company. So does this mean your workforce is shrinking? Have you lost staff? How is this impacting you?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So it's not impacting us in that sense. Yes, we were fully aware that the province was going to be uploading employment services to a service system manager. We're in a particular phase right now, not the last across the province, but we will be fully implemented by January. I will say our caseloads have not gone down. In fact, our caseloads now are currently higher than the provincial forecast out to March of 2025. So we are moving into life stabilization for January, and certainly we are understaffed at present, and we'll probably be coming to council to advise of efforts to increase our workforce to be able to assist all of the individuals.
You must feel that there's no real stability in everything you're doing. Like you're going as fast as you can forward, but
There's certainly no lack of change.
yeah, for sure. So I've got a question now, in a discussion before the meeting I had with Ms. Smith. I discovered there was a difference between accessible units and barrier-free units. Now, what do we have at the new build at McConnell and 9th?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So at McCall and 9th, we have what are called barrier-free units. So accessible units will exceed those building code standards. So you'll often find things like specialized appliances, things available in that unit. What we have are barrier-free. So someone with any sort of level around maybe a physical impairment or something of that nature would be able to move around freely. Turning radiuses, our washroom actually exceeds probably the barrier-free standards, more of an accessible standard. But not everything in there is fully accessible, but they are very accessible. Just to be said, if we did have someone who was interested in a unit of that nature, again, that's something potentially we can work with in terms of specific needs, maybe around other features we could maybe include to make it even more user-friendly.
So for example, in a kitchen, because you mentioned the washrooms actually are more spacious than simply a barrier-free washroom would be. So how do the kitchens stack up?
So the kitchens underneath have like a good section that are fully open. So if you are sitting in a chair or on a scooter or on a other kind of walker device, you can kind of scoot that under the counter. You can be at the right height at your counter, be cleaning and prepping food. There's lots of cupboard space that is available at a reachable height. Again, the cupboards are a little lower in those units. And again, it's the turning radius, right? So it's the space actually, the way they're designed so that you can easily move around in that space.
So if somebody were to apply for a unit and say they required an accessible unit, are there upgrades that you would manage on basically a client to client basis? Like, can you actually modify the accessible units to make them, or rather the barrier-free units to make them accessible?
So on a case-by-case basis, we can look at it and see what people would require. Probably the biggest modifications we would be making is the appliances. That's pretty much it. Everything else, light switches, everything else are at a reachable height. That probably would be the only thing where we'd have to maybe do some minor modifications, but all doable.
And, well, that's pretty wonderful to hear. So I've heard from a few people too, in fact, who got a call that they were eligible to have an apartment at McConnell and Ninth, and they were both thrilled, so
Excellent.
you're making a lot of people happy.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of questions on, I don't know what the page number is, but the one that looks like this. Just some questions on your data. The, where you have the housing costs, is that included, is that just rent? Or like the 1,300, 1,307, the 890, 890, 1,092 under housing? Is that just the rent? I think, is that just the rent?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I pulled that data from the eating, I can't remember, I have to, my stickies on it, sorry. The cost of eating report prepared by the Ontario Health Unit, Eastern Ontario Health Unit. That housing number, when I took a look at it, actually does include like some utility costs. So they've put some rent in there, some utilities. So they've tried to give a rough estimate of like what on average housing might cost. I have to be honest, when I look at those numbers, I think they're on par or maybe even a little underreported.
So you think that number should be higher?
Could be, yeah.
Well, just some, because I do civics careers in school, and we do some number crunching. That number seems a little low. Now, I'm not going to suggest I'm an expert, just some random Google searches and stuff like that in Cornwall rent. I thought it was around 1,700.
So when we pulled our own alternate average market rent to be able to determine what we might partner with a private landlord on, our level right now is $1,075 for a one-bedroom unit. So
One bedroom.
for a one-bedroom. So to
Okay.
stay true, though, to the data prepared by the health unit, I used their numbers. I thought I wanted to be respectful for their data integrity. But again, I think could in this market be a little underreported for sure.
Okay. And that family of four, they're living in a two-bedroom apartment? Or are they living in a one?
I think they, family of four, if I remember correctly, based on the report, was living in a 3 to 4 bedroom,
Okay.
like house or apartment. Yeah.
Okay, so what's interesting is if you do a little bit of number crunching at $20 an hour, which seems pretty good, when you do some data, even with these numbers, it's not really very good at all. As a single income at $20 an hour, at $3,200 a month, assuming you're paying even 20% income tax, you're barely getting by. There's no fun or frivolity, if you will. We haven't included, a car and payments and insurance and all that stuff. Then assuming you're taking public transit, the number's a little better for sure, but that means you still have to come up. The second question I wanted to ask is that 1.9% on the subsequent page, the next page, what's the ideal vacancy rate? What should we, if we said, okay, we're going to build enough houses to get to the perfect kind of balance in the market, what
Yeah.
should we strive to be looking to? 5%, 6%? What's the
So
number?
I, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure we could give you an estimate on the percentage, but I can tell you based on our housing revitalization report, in late 2019, early 2020, we needed 741 affordable units in the next 10 years to meet the demand.
I'd be curious at some point if we could find out what some expert has said is supposed to be the perfect rate, just as a matter of curiosity, which gets me to the following question. So if you look at the one that's being built in Morrisburg, Pitt Street, 9th Street, and then, of course, I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that council has gotten into kind of I won't know if the word is a subsidy program, but an augmentation program, corner of Pitt and 2nd, and then the other one that's not started yet, but has been discussed right beside the zone across from St. Lawrence College. If you factor in all those units, what would our vacancy rate be, assuming that, let's pretend in 3 years, all of them are done and everybody's moving in? Anyway, I won't talk about the other one, but anyway, the ones that are online that look like they're making some progress and really seeming to get somewhere, what would our vacancy rate be then? Do we have a number?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So again, that would be difficult because I think with some of those private developments, again, I've sat with a number of other administration as well to speak with those developers. To qualify for those programs, they do follow our levels, our rent levels, but to the what we call our high end of our rent scales. So while they would be deemed affordable in like some of the units a percentage of the units are deemed affordable, they're high end of affordable, so they will probably cater more to those families who are working the $23 an hour job versus somebody who's in receipt of social assistance, whereas that's where the deep core housing is where we will need to concentrate our efforts, where private developers will probably be looking at what we would call then that high end of market up to whatever they
Right.
will want to charge for their units.
The only subsequent to that, however, is if you adhere to the law of supply and demand, more units potentially, if not lowers the cost of housing, at least
Right.
maintains it at its current level.
Correct.
And kind of mitigates the rates of inflation and stuff like that. I'd be curious, and I don't necessarily, if we could, and I don't know who wants, it doesn't need to be tackled this evening, but I would just like to know that if you allocate all those units just on a pure percentage basis, how much closer that gets us to an ideal rate once the private sector, particularly the ones who have gotten in on our kind of programming, and then the ones that we are initiating ourselves. I would be interested to see how that changes, because at 1.3, that's not very good. The province isn't very good, and we're like crazy below that. So I would be interested to see where we are once that 3 years' time, if we're getting anywhere, and I know you talked about as some of these developments come on board, they require more workers. As those people work, they move to the city, which doesn't move the needle very much because they're literally moving into all the new apartments that are created potentially. They're taking them up, so the needle doesn't do anything. It basically stays the same. It doesn't have to happen this evening, Your Worship, but I'd be curious to see.
And
how
through
that shakes
you,
out.
Mr. Mayor, so to your point, Councillor Hollingsworth, again, supply and demand, right now, there's a high demand with little supply.
Right,
The
of
more
course.
supply comes on the market, the, less in demand, and things will then become, I don't want to say more equalized, but you may get somebody who's living in a house now who wants to downsize to one of these
Right.
apartments. So it's just, again, it's that chain reaction of, I don't know that we'd even be able to, we may have to wait and collect that data and look at it a couple of years from now, but,
Four-year
right.
down the road
Right.
kind of thing,
Yeah.
rather than, it's not like next month, we're gonna say, oh, here we are.
And we provided this data last year. We'll provide it again every year in our report, so we hopefully will be able to show you those
Yeah, I'd
kinds
be
of.
curious to
yeah.
see if we're getting anywhere or
Yeah,
not.
absolutely.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth. So the vacancy rate is actually prepared by Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation based on census data. So they have economists who analyze all that data. That's how they get to this number. So to your point, what will happen is as those units start to come online in the community, that'll start to show up in the Canada Mortgage and Housing data. We probably would see the impact of that in about 2 to 3 years by pulling their stats and their numbers. So it's not even something we would have to do. It gets reported on annually by CMHC. So we'll keep.
Mr. Bolo?
Yeah, just to throw some numbers out there, we have a little over 20,000 residential units in the city. And of course, not all of those are rental units, but just to give you an idea. And then for those 6 properties that we had identified in the downtown in Le Village, we were hoping to get a minimum of 300 units on those 6 properties. The second project that just came in that council recently approved reached much further on that property in excess of 100 units. I think it's 120 units. So it could be, for example, that rather than having 300 units on those 6 properties, maybe we're looking at 500 units. And so 500 into 20,000 is about a 2.5% increase. So all things being equal, it can have the 77 units and the 300 to 500 units in the downtown and Le Village can have a very considerable impact on the vacancy rate.
Any further questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor of receiving the presentation? Carried, thank you. Thank you.
And so the report on the same subject has a recommendation that council receive this report.
Moved by Councillor Bennett, seconded by Councillor Hollingsworth. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
Consent reports. I'm going to start off with a couple of proclamations recommending that council proclaim the month of June 2023 as Recreation and Parks Month in the city of Cornwall, and that Cornwall proclaim the month of May 2023 as Tamil Genocide Month in the city of Cornwall. Annual report from Integrity Commissioner. The recommendation is that council receive this report. May Pack, 17 2nd Street West, 11 1st Street East, 30 2nd Street West, 107 Sydney, and 1080 Montreal Road. With the recommendation that council approve the 5 Planning Advisory Committee recommendations as presented on May 5th, 2023. RFP 19P15 Art Center, Phase 3 construction and post-construction services, with a recommendation that council approve proceeding with Phase 3 of RFP 19P15, architectural and engineering services for Cornwall's Arts Center with GRC Architects Incorporated from Ottawa for a total of $509,883.44. RFP 21 PO6 Cornwall Civic Complex Stair and Patio Design. The action recommended is that council approve proceeding with the provisional items of RFP 21 PO6 Cornwall Civic Complex Stair and Patio Design with J.L. Richards and Associates from Ottawa, which includes $98,481.64 for provisional item 1, construction documents, $11,331.58 for provisional item number 2, tendering services, and $149,253 for provisional item number 3, construction administration and inspection, and post-construction services, for a total of $259,066.22, excluding HST. Tender 2316, reconstruction of 5th Street East, with a recommendation that this tender be awarded to Cornwall Gravel Company Limited from Cornwall at the total bid price of $3,777,068.63. Tender 23T23, Cornwall Fire Station Headquarters and Training Center construction, with a recommendation that this tender be awarded to ASCO Construction Limited from Hawkesbury at the total bid price of $17,324,048.65. Tender 23T29, with a recommendation that this tender be awarded to DDDG Engineering Services from Elizabethtown at the total bid price of $128,066.
Motion. Councillor Bennett, seconder. Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
Reports from unfinished business. We have the business listing, and we're looking for a motion to receive this listing, Mr. Mayor.
Motion, Councillor Councillor McIntosh, seconder. Councillor Sabare, any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Carried, thank you.
Proclamation, Public Hospital Appreciation Week. The recommendation is that council proclaim the week of May 21st to 27th, 2023 as Public Hospital Appreciation Week in the city of Cornwall.
Motion, Councillor McDonald, seconder. Councillor Sabare, discussion, Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak to this issue. I think right now in Ontario, everybody's got a heightened sense of concern about healthcare, having just come through a pandemic. I guess that does it to all of us. And I'd like us to recall that for 3 years, our public health systems were the frontline response and our hospitals were severely challenged to create and maintain the ultimate safe zone for everyone at great cost. And no small part of that great cost was having to go to work for 3 years in what was comparable to hazmat suits. You can't imagine the discomfort. And on top of that, every time you went to work in a hospital, you were asked to work overtime and forego days off. I think our hospitals and the people who sustain them were stretched almost beyond the limits. So now, 3 years on in what we can call the post-COVID era, and I think we do that with our fingers crossed, because we keep hearing of people who succumb to COVID even now. But in any case, the masking requirements are gone, so in a sense, we are in a post-COVID era. And instead of relief and the opportunity to stabilize and regroup, our public hospitals face another challenge to their continued viability as the ultimate health resource in our communities. And I refer in this case to the establishment of private for-profit clinics, which will drain public hospitals of resources and personnel as it draws away patients. So I think people are justified in feeling great concern for the stability of the public system. So it's important that we, as citizens who have relied on public hospitals through almost 3 generations since 1974, when the Private Hospital Act was passed, which outlawed private for-profit clinics, that we stand up and be vocal in our appreciation and gratitude and support for our public hospitals. And so I ask all my colleagues to ask the mayor to proclaim this week, May 21st to 27th, as Public Hospital Appreciation Week in Cornwall.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? Councillor Sabri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kind of echoing what Councillor McDonald said, I can't help but stress the need for the recognition of the public within our public healthcare system and our public operated hospitals. I think it's this proclamation is timely with another aspect of the public awareness and a public appreciation here, and that's the volunteer referendum that's happening across the province, with votes happening on Friday and Saturday of this week with regards to protest, if you will, of the privatization of the healthcare system. The government likes to spend money, big dollars, on polling information to see what the public thinks. Well, this is a freebie for the government, with the people of Ontario taking the opportunity to letting the government know what their thoughts are on privatization. And for that reason, I'm fully supportive of this proclamation, and I'm also supportive of the referendum that's happening, and encouraging people to take the opportunity to go out and participate in that referendum this weekend. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Further questions, comments? Okay. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
RFP 23P11, Design of Affordable Housing Project in Morrisburg, with the recommendation that this RFP be awarded to the Ventin Group from Ottawa at a total bid price of $318,886, including HST.
Motion. Councillor Gunjo. Seconder, Councillor Gardner. Discussion. Councillor Gunjo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. When I read this, I had a couple of questions that popped out. I was wondering, what are we doing in a project in Morrisburg? We are trying to build houses here in Cornwall, but here is Morrisburg, so I don't know who can help me with answering this question.
Ms. Morgan.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we are the service manager for community housing, and we represent the entire geographic region. So we don't just look at the city of Cornwall, we have to look at all of the counties as well. Our housing revitalization plan identified the number of units that would be needed across both the city and the counties. And so the counties pay a portion of the delivery of services for social housing. And so our third development, we felt it best to bring it into a community that has been identified in our housing revitalization plan. So you will see more building going on within the counties as well as the city in the future.
Okay, that means that we're going to spend money from Cornwall there?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it does in essence, but the cost to deliver social housing is cost shared between the city and county. So it doesn't matter whether it's built in the city or the county, the cost to deliver social housing becomes part of our larger budget, and it's split based on a shared services agreement with the counties.
Thank you very much, Julio. Mr. Last question. That means we can send people who are trying to find house here in Cornwall there too,
Through you,
since we
Mr.
are
Mayor.
spending money there.
Absolutely. So our housing, the rent geared to income is a wait list, and anybody can apply. People from out of province can apply to be on our social housing wait list, as well as from other communities. And certainly anybody making an application for any of our market or near market units, it would go out like we did with the 9th Street publicized, and anybody then that meets that criteria could qualify eventually for those units.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Further questions or comments? Councillor Gardner, then Councillor Good.
I have a question. When I was looking at the tenders for this work, Arcadia IVI Group total bid price was $253,188. The tender went to Venton Group, TVG Architects, at $318,886. So why did the lowest bid not get the job?
Ms. Morgan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and I will also look to Mrs. Bailey, perhaps for some information on this as well. The RFP process goes to a committee, and we rate all of the proponents based on everything meeting bid specifications. Certainly, then they're scored and rated, and this company came out as the best, despite the fact that they may be a little higher in price. They may have scored higher in other areas, which would have brought them to be that proponent that we looked at as the one being meeting the best tender specifications or proposal specifications.
And I guess that explanation should have been put in the tenders, that the difference between the two bid prices. Why didn't the lower price get it? Should have been in the tenders. It should have let us know, not tenders, but in the final agreement, to let us know that the lowest price didn't get it because of. And normally, we have a part of the groups that don't make it, we're told why they didn't make it. In this case, I found it funny that you were looking at $50,000 to $60,000 difference and giving it to the higher bidder without any explanation.
Ms. Bailey?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we don't normally put the reasons why in the report to council. There's many criteria that are listed that we want to see in the proposals that come in under the items that are evaluated. So for this proposal, we're looking for the experience of the proponent, but there's a list of items that are expected to be included in the proposal. The same with the experience and qualifications of a personnel. There's a number of criteria under that category. And so we've not ever put in the report to council all of those evaluations. That is the responsibility of the selection committee. And then the organization or company that has the best overall result in the evaluation is presented to council for consideration and approval.
I guess my fear of that is that at some point in time, the lowest bidder doesn't get the job. The next time, he won't bid on anything. And we're going to reduce the number of bidders on different jobs by not giving the low bidder, that's my fear. By not giving the low bidder the job, we are reducing the number of bidders on different jobs. Thank you for I understand what you were saying, because I sat in that chair and we evaluated when it came through. I would have questioned it at that time. Thank you.
Councillor Good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I believe in one of our previous meetings, this project was presented. And I wanted to ask, so how many units are anticipated in this project?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So we're going to be looking at this project in 2 phases, just simply because of cost. So this first phase, I believe we're looking at up to 17 units. Again, we've determined that that is probably something that we're comfortable in looking at from an affordability and the cost perspective. Once we've hired the architect now and the architect works with us, we'll be able to see based on where our budget is at, if we're still able to maximize up to 17 units or if we can do more or less. Phase 2 is really going to be a longer term process because it then looks to do something else with another community that we have to consider. But I think we were looking up to 17 units.
Okay, and I guess, so my question is, so I'm looking at this and we're gonna be seeing some relief, what does it say here? We're eligible to receive an allocation of $1.7 million, including 3% for administration. Like, I'm ballparking, this will put us, we're going to basically mortgage at roughly $3 million based on the numbers here. And so my question was, because this is an asset, like this is a mortgage for a building that is housing, and we are getting funding back for that monthly through rent, I assume. So how long would it take to pay back the loan that we would need to take out for the $3 million-ish? Like, is that a residential mortgage would be like a 25-year period? Is that sort of what we look at in these terms, or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So certainly it depends on the level of funding we're going to be trying to mortgage. And I shouldn't use the term mortgage because a municipality cannot take out a mortgage. So the amount to borrow, certainly we look at, again, feasibility and the impact to the municipal budget, because we won't collect everything we need through rent, so there will be a municipal impact on our budget that we'll have to build into subsequent years' budget. So we try to offset the amount of revenue we could collect versus the municipal subsidies, so that we're not, if it means, so as an example, on 9th Street, we are trying to take out the longest possible borrowing time that you could think of to try and make it the project feasible, so that we're not looking to council to subsidize hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s a year just to pay for the mortgages or the cost to borrow as an example.
And what would be that longest period of time, just ballpark anyways?
50 years.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions or comments? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
We have 2 new business motions. The first one is speed limits. Now therefore be it resolved that administration be requested to prepare a report for council on reducing speed limits in residential and BIA areas to 40 kilometers.
Councillor Good.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I brought this forward. Obviously, this has been a point of discussion since I started on council, and I'm sure for many, many, many years before that. We have, I think, 3 items coming up on our unfinished business listing: traffic safety and traffic calming, speed enforcement strategies, automated speed enforcement. Clearly, this is a hot issue that we need to explore. In speaking with Mr. Fothrop, I believe it was at our last meeting or potentially the meeting before that, I inquired to see whether or not the reports that were coming back would be including a potential to reduce speed limits, and it was indicated that they were not, which is fine. And so in discussion with a few of my colleagues anyways, I decided to bring this forward, and I'm assuming based on the dates now of when those reports will be coming, that it's probably taking into account that this will factor into it. There are many municipalities around Ontario that have reduced their rates down to 40. I think this will be a great benefit to our residents, especially as we are looking to create a safer, more pedestrian-friendly, bike-friendly community. And so I hope that this can help calm traffic, and I'm excited to see what administration will come back with as far as recommendations with a speed reduction.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. This was an easy motion to second, and I thank Councillor Good for bringing it forward. Like Councillor Good, I've had many conversations with people, particularly in the downtown core, but also school zones, and those kinds of places where, and I think our one-way streets are probably the bigger problem, which I hope is something we tackle shortly, because it's basically drag strips. So I think the fact that you can drive almost right into our downtown doing 60 plus is a problem. I do a lot of riding around in the summer months, and you'd be amazed how many communities now have 40-kilometer-hour limits going through their downtowns and some of their neighborhoods. So I don't think this is something that's way out there. I think it's something that's being done already. And like Councillor Good has just said, I'm really looking forward to this report because I think this is something that's doable. Because clearly, people can't respect safety of other people. They're just more concerned about getting somewhere 2 minutes faster, I guess. But something needs to be done, and this seems to be working in other communities. Like I said, I'm driving through them often, and people are doing the lower speed limit. I don't know what it is because it's something new and it's caught their eyes, but whatever it is, it seems to be working in those areas because nobody's racing by me when I'm doing the 43rd through their neighborhoods either. So I look forward to this report. Thank you.
Councillor Gunjo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor Choyo. I think this report, we really need to have more information about the traffic in our community because, as Councillor Todd said, a bunch of residents are contacting me complaining about speed in our community. And one thing is very important to be mentioned is that our traffic or our road were designed to permit speed. So in plus of trying to decrease the speed, I think we should try to see how we can add some sign or stop to decrease in plus of decreasing speed. We need to add, I'm gonna do or make a friendly amendment to ask if the administration can check how we can or where we can put more stop signs or plot to decrease speed, more specifically around schools, parks, and road has Riverdale. A lot of people are complaining about this street. So this is a report that we need. So I think that is a mandate for the administration. And after having this report, then we can check with the police department how they can reinforce this report or how they can reinforce the policy that we're going to try to put in place. So I totally agree with what is coming on about traffic, and thank you very much to Councillor Saragot.
So are you looking for a seconder for your amendment, Councillor Gunjo?
I need a yes.
Is that a point of order, Councillor Hollingsworth?
Can I get the actual amendment read so I know what it is we're gonna vote and potentially debate on?
So me or
Whomever wants to word it.
Councillor Gunjo?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much. So the friendly amendment will be to ask to the administration to study where we can increase or put more stop signs or plots to decrease speeds.
Mr. Bolo?
I would think that we're considering traffic calming, but I would ask Mr. Pescott or Mr. Pescott, Mr. Fothrop. Yes, I have Mr. Fothrop to speak to that.
Mr. Fothrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so the item that is brought forward in this new business motion will be discussed, and we'll prepare a report for when the traffic department and the police department present on traffic safety in the city, which was on the unfinished business listing. In terms of stop signs aren't recommended as a speed control device. They've been proven not to slow down speed just because vehicle stops, and as they pass the stop sign, they get back up to speed very, very quickly. So it only really calms traffic in that immediate vicinity of that stop sign. So there's other traffic calming measures, as Mr. Boileau has indicated, which like the environment allows you to drive the speed, I guess, not necessarily stop signs. So we are preparing a report on traffic and traffic calming within the city. It'll be brought forward in the next few weeks for council's consideration, and this will be one of the items that will be reviewed and discussed at that point.
Councillor Hollingsworth and Councillor Bennett.
I'd support the original motion to look at reducing speeds. I would support any amendment that suggests traffic calming, but I will not support any amendment that suggests we have more stop signs. Because quite frankly, Your Worship, every engineer, and I've done almost 20 years, about 7 administrations, and I have yet to have a traffic manager tell me that stop signs randomly placed are a good idea when trying to manage speeds. You only have to drive to the airport towards Montreal to realize how dangerous they are when they're not used properly. Stop signs, from what I understand, determine right-of-way. If you place them at the wrong spot, you have people driving when they're not supposed to be driving and stopping when they're not supposed to be stopping. And if you don't believe me, come and take a walk around Riverdale. It's wonderful. You're never sure who's going to stop and who's not going to stop. And anybody who lives there, I think, would agree with me. And I suspect there's other neighborhoods in town that operate the same way. So I'm cool with speed. I'm certainly okay with traffic calming. Whatever admin might have to come up with, I'm interested in. But if the motion specifically says stop signs or the amendment says stop line, I will vote against it. Thank you.
I believe we're discussing the amendment at this time. I'm going to return to my original speakers list before I recognize you again, Councillor Bennett. So I had Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, if I thought putting up a speed limit sign of 40 would be the cure of the problem, they just go 55, that's all. What is our speed limit on a residential street? Councillor Bennett said 60?
No, I said they're doing 60.
60, okay.
Mr. Fotherop.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so the standardized speed limit in an urban area is 50 kilometers an hour unless posted otherwise.
Yeah.
So in residential areas, Riverdale or wherever, for example, it's 50 kilometers as long as there's no speed sign that indicates otherwise.
Yeah, so we universally make it 40K, and somebody mentioned enforcement. They don't have the manpower, folks, to enforce that next door. They just don't. They're operating with 41% fewer personnel. If you were in business and you had 41% of your employees not able to come to work, you'd be out of business. So don't expect the police department to be the answer to this. Trust me, they just don't have the manpower. They can put up the odd time there when they've got some downtime, put a person on a power dam with a radar or somewhere else, but to think that they can enforce throughout the city on a continual basis, you're dreaming. It's not going to happen. But, I'll support it because, we go down to 40, but you're still going to have people saying, guy just went by my house at 55. I don't know how you tell it's 55, but people, they're better than radar guns. But I'm not downplaying the speeding in the community. It's always been there. But if the 40 works, great.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this one really makes me upset. On November 28th, 22, I put a motion forward for traffic safety automated speed enforcement. On November 28th, Council also asked that a presentation on speed enforcement strategies from Cornwall Police Services, we wanted answers from them. They're the ones responsible for what happens on our roads. November 28th, 2022, again, Council requested a traffic study and traffic calming automated speed enforcement. Now we have another motion come forward because all of the councillors receive calls, receive emails from across the city of people who speed, and we can bring that down to 40 kilometers an hour, they're still going to speed. And we have stop signs at my corner And I have children waiting for school buses every day. Every day, people fly through the stop signs. We need enforcement. And if the police need more help, then let's look at bylaw to help them out. Since the time I and other councillors, we've received numerous complaints from residents across the city of Cornwall, re-speeding, ignoring stop signs, and now another motion to reduce speeds to 40 kilometers an hour. I agree with that. Although I'll support this motion, I see no reasons why the idiots who now break the existing laws will comply. The idiot drivers, and I may get in trouble for saying that, but they are. We need police presence, and it is their responsibility that motorists comply to the laws on the books now. I look forward to June the 12th, 2023, to have the issues dealt with, or should there be a town hall dealing with this issue. And a town hall meeting would bring in residents from all over the city, and we would hear it. That the police, unfortunately, don't have the manpower. And you're right, Councillor McIntosh. I believe the last number the chief gave us was 43%, not 41. What's going on there? Why are there so many people out on stress leaves or sick leaves? We need to know that, because this isn't going to solve the problem. This 40 kilometers an hour won't solve the problem. We had one police officer sitting at one corner over and over and over because a resident asked them to be there. They nailed a whole bunch of people in weeks. By the time that ended, those people got their tickets. There weren't any more stops. These people that weren't stopping got nailed for speeding and stopping and not stopping at the stop signs. We need police presence, and I don't know how we're going to do it or how it's going to happen. If bylaw can look after that, let's not wait till somebody's child waiting for a school bus gets killed in this city before we do something about it. And I agree with what you're saying about 40 kilometers an hour, but I don't think it's going to change anything because the idiots will continue to speed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just getting back to the amendment, did I understand correctly from Mr. Fawthrop that a lot of what was asked for in the amendment is already coming forward in the report?
Mr. Fawthrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct. So we're presenting an overview of traffic in the city, as well as discussing potential traffic calming measures, where we recommend them and where we don't. So yes, a lot of this would be inclusive of that presentation.
Okay, so hearing that answer, I am under of the impression that the amendment is kind of unnecessary. It'd be just duplicating reports. So I would vote against the amendment, but I'm still in support of the original motion. People typically drive 10, 15 clicks over a speed limit. So if the speed limit is 50, they're doing 60, 65. If the speed limit is 40, they're going to be doing 50, 55, which is what's the reasonable speed limit is supposed to be. That's just the way people think. Driving any road, the average speed is 10 to 15 clicks over the speed limit. So does it need the police to be there for the next 6 months to make sure they're doing 40? I don't think so. I think the signs will do a lot of it. And I mean, just because right at this particular moment we don't have a full policing complement doesn't mean we shouldn't change something. Because I mean, using that logic, then we should just get rid of seatbelt laws and every other road safety law, because we don't know if anybody's going to enforce anyway. So it's, Armageddon out there now. So I don't think that's the excuse we should use, because hopefully within a certain amount of time we'll have more police officers. So I can't use that as a reason not to change the 40. But going to the amendment, I would vote against the amendment, and the original motion is how I'd like to have it.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Yeah, Councillor Goodrow, I'll allow you to wrap up on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, through you. As councillor, we have to think further, not only for today. We have to make the best choice for our community. And I don't want to deal with a matter like a kid has been killed because of speed in our community. We have to act now, even if we don't have enough police reinforcement, but at least we will be sure that we did what should be done by augmenting the number of stops in our municipality. I think it's something very important to do. We are not the first. Just go to another community or to Quebec, we're going to see that they increase the number of stops and it's working there. Why it's not going to work here in our municipality? That is a question. Because we have no more police officer? I don't think so. I think we have to be more responsible. Residents are asking more action about speed in our municipality. We know that roads are built to increase speed, but now we can act by cutting those speeds, by adding stop sign or plot to decrease speed. So that's why I think all of us around the table here should vote for this motion. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call the vote on the amendment. Do we need the amendment read out again before we vote? Okay, all in favor of the amendment? All opposed? Abstentions? Okay. The amendment doesn't pass. We're back to debate on the main motion. Any further commentary on the main motion? Councillor McIntosh.
I just want to note something Councillor Gardner said about using bylaw officers to enforce the Highway Traffic Act. I don't think that's legal. I don't think bylaw officers have the powers to give out speeding tickets. In fact, bylaw officers, you don't even have to tell them who you are if they stop you. You have to identify yourself. You don't have to identify yourself to a law enforcement person. So looking at bylaw to help that problem isn't going to, it's not feasible. It's not even feasible. It's not, you can't do it.
I'll allow you to wrap up, Councillor Good, but I don't want to get into a back and forth debate here, but I'll allow you one response, Councillor Gardner, then we'll go back.
We have to do something. There's a problem in the city. We have to do something about it. I brought up the name bylaw. If we could use them, that's fine. If we can't, we have to do something to stop the speeding and the idiots that go through the stop signs, period.
Before I allow Councillor Good to wrap up, are there any comments from anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Councillor Sabouret.
While I'm supportive of the idea of reducing speed and for the safety component that represents, I really kind of do wonder as to whether or not this should actually be deferred to the June 12th would then be part of the larger debate from the representations that we're going to be getting from the administration and from the police department and the reports that they are going to be giving. Because right now, I think what we really have to address this issue is the tandem of solutions, the multiple solutions that have got to go hand in hand. To throw one out and say, this is it, look at what we've done, it's not going to solve it in that. For all the various reasons that have been stated so far, manpower issues, whether or not stop signs actually do the job. If you're going to go with stop signs at multiple corners, then do you have to look at speed bumps or whatever to help those people, or remind those people of the need to stop and accelerate at a reasonable rate, things along that line. So if at all anything, while I say I'm supportive of this, I would really feel that this should be part of the larger debate happening on the 12th, and for that reason, this should be deferred.
I think the intent, Councillor Sabouret, is to ask for a report to be ready for debate at that meeting, but if you are looking for a motion to defer, if you're asking for one, is there a seconder for the motion to defer? Councillor McDonald. Councillor McDonald?
given that June 12th is our next meeting, so we're simply, I think tonight we're just making a motion to have a report, not to actually do anything
Yes, that-
beyond hearing a report. So
That's correct.
would this not naturally come back on June 12th?
Mr. CEO, Mr. Bolo?
I think it would be asking a lot to have this for June 12th, because it's, although it's a sort of connected on subject, I think this needs a whole lot more work on the subject of 40 kilometers versus our existing. But I would turn to Michael Fothrop to explain.
Mr. Fothrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Boileau is correct. The 40 kilometers an hour speed limits are, it's a big answer and it's a big report. You know, I could give you some of that anecdotal information here today, but there's cost estimates that we would need to look at. We would need to look at where signs would need to go, what the costs are for those signs. So in short, it is a fairly lengthy report on the matter, and the next council meeting is relatively close.
Councilor McDonald?
So do we have a date for I support the motion if it is to have this report folded into the other one, regardless of what date that will be, not likely June 12th.
Mr. Fothrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the July 10th meeting would work the best.
So for clarification, Councilor McDonald, were you seconding the motion to defer?
I'm seconding, yes.
Okay. So we are now debating the deferral. Councilor Good.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not clear on the purpose of the deferral, because the deferral is to create the report, but creating the report and giving that direction to administration is necessary for it to then be considered as part of the broader report that's coming back. As I mentioned at the beginning, in discussions with Mr. Fothrop, this speed limit reduction was not to be included as part of what was coming back to us at our next meeting, I believe. And so this is the reason why I am bringing it forward, because I truly believe that reducing our speed limits in our inner city, in our residential areas, in our downtown areas is a matter of public safety. I'm not going to do my summary because this is about the deferral. I do not think the deferral is going to produce any different or better results as far as incorporating that speed reduction. However, perhaps Mr. Fothrop, in order to have that information presented as part of the broader speed limit enforcement, automated enforcement, traffic calming measures, there are several individualized items that are accounted for on the new business. In my estimation, this would just be added as another item, but included as part of a broader report. Am I understanding that correctly?
Mr. Fothrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that'd be our intent.
I do not support a motion to defer naturally, because I do want this to be included as part of the whole report. Thank you.
Councilor Hollingsworth?
Thank you, Your Worship. See if I can get a little clarity for myself. Traffic calming and speed, are they two different entities?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, yeah.
That's all I needed. Thank you. That being said, Your Worship, then I'm not going to support the motion to defer.
Councilor Bennett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm also not going to support the motion to defer. We're asking for a report, and to defer to what? To move the report deadline back another couple of weeks? Doesn't make sense to me. I just want to move ahead with this original motion, so I'll vote against the deferral.
Councilor Gunjo?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the problem is very important. We need to act. Our residents are waiting for us to act about a problem that we have in our municipality, in our community. So, okay, we can defer, but it's not something that people are waiting for us to do. They need act. We need to act. So I'm not going to support the defer, and I think we should go through the motion that was proposed by Councillor Good.
Further comments on the deferral? Councilor McIntosh?
Well, on June 12th, we have city police going to be here to discuss traffic safety and traffic calming, automatic speed enforcement. They're also going to discuss presentation of speed enforcement strategies, and they're also going to discuss automated speed enforcement. I mean, this report, I thought he said July something. So we're going to have the police come, the authorities on this. and then we're gonna have a report from administration a month later. We may have all the problems solved that night.
Mr. Fothrop.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what we're proposing is we would address all issues, all encompassing on July 10th, including the reduction in speed limit. So that date that is proposed on the unfinished business listing would be moved to July 10th.
Okay, I get you. I
Yeah.
misunderstood you. Okay, that makes sense.
Further comments on the deferral? Councillor Sabri, do you want to wrap up on the deferral?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just see it as an opportunity to weigh all information in a meaningful manner and being able to give solid direction with all the information that would be presented at the one time. So that was the intent of the deferral.
Okay. All in favor of the deferral? All opposed to the deferral? Okay, deferral is defeated. We're back to the main motion. Are there any further comments on the main motion? Councillor Good, I'll allow you to wrap up.
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, this was brought forward because it's an issue we have all heard about at length. We know it's an issue. We live in this city. When the speed limit's 50, people are driving 60 minimum, and that's just the reality of it. Intentionally, enforcement was not included in this motion, and the reason for that is because when we construct our environment to make our roads safer and to encourage people to drive slower, they do. There's a social pressure that comes with that. When you're driving past a 40 sign going 60, you might have a second thought. Further to that, if you're going to drive past in a 40 zone going 60, the fine that you could possibly get could be much higher. So there's many incentives and many reasons why I think this would be an effective way to reduce some of the speeding problems that we have in our city. I'm very grateful to administration, Mr. Fothrop, that you have agreed to include this as part of the broader picture because we know this is an issue in our community and it's something that needs to be addressed holistically and also expediently. So I look forward to hearing this come back. I hope that my colleagues will be in support of this motion.
Okay, before I call the vote on the motion, do we need the motion read again for clarity, or are we good? Okay, I think we're good. All in favor of the motion? All opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you.
Tree cutting bylaw. Now therefore be it resolved that administration prepare a report on the requirements to establish permitting processes for clear cutting and removal of significant trees within city limits to ensure that the environmental and social impacts of the removal are minimized through mitigation measures and replacement planting. Now be it further resolved that the City of Cornwall will work collaboratively with community partners and stakeholders to develop and implement education and outreach programs that promote the value and importance of urban forest and that encourage sustainable and responsible forestry practices in our city and inform council where significant city-owned trees must be removed.
Councillor Good.
Thank you. Again, this motion came forward after lengthy discussion around the council table in regards to tree cutting and tree planting and how we can mitigate the loss of our canopy within the city. Now, I had said out loud at a previous meeting that I was pretty sure this was coming forward from the Environment Committee, and I was informed after making that statement that that wasn't 100% true. So the reason for me bringing this forward is so that we as council can give direction to administration to say that this is something that we want, we value our tree cover, we understand the significance of it, and that we do want to be informed whenever there are going to be significant losses so that we can be prepared to deal with the potential backlash that may come from that. I think this is I hope this is an easy motion for the rest of council to support. This is a great thing for our cities and for our city, and I look forward to seeing what administration would come back with. Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. This is an easy motion, again, for me to support, and thank you, Councillor Good, for bringing it forward. This is one of those things we've talked about a lot, off-the-cuff kind of comments when we're talking about these issues for the last several years. So it's nice to see something come forward, and I'm almost embarrassed that I haven't done it myself being someone that's commented about the fact that we're clear cutting trees for no reason. So, an example is, I have a subdivision behind me that has been created in the last couple of years behind my home, and it was clear cut. And now when I look at the shape of the lots going in, there was no reason to cut a lot of those trees along the back sides, or in corners in particular. Beautiful, big trees torn down for zero reason. There's not going to be anything back at the back of these properties. And then if you go drive down Marlow, you used to not be able to see any of those homes for all the trees clear cut. For what? We don't even know what's going to go in there yet. And if it is going to be homes, there's nothing wrong with leaving trees up in a backyard. When did clear cutting a neighborhood become the thing to do? I don't understand. Trees just beautify your neighborhood so much more than just a flat plain. So I think we do need a permit structure so that conversation can be had when we're clearing space for subdivisions, or for whatever reason somebody wants to clear cut a property. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be controlled a little bit better, because clear cutting for the sake of clear cutting is what's happening, and I don't see any reason for it. So I'll support this motion all day long. Thanks.
Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, I'll support this motion. It's been years since I've been bringing this forward, and nothing ever got done. Thank you for the motion. It's time. When I talk about our Dam Drive and the clear cutting that was done there, birds sanctuary it was, turtle sanctuary it was. All these animals are moving into the urban community because they were taking away their homes. So at the end of the day, I'm going to support this. I have been talking about it for a number of years. Thank you for bringing it forward.
Councillor Ngunjo, then Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you. This is a very good news, a good thing for our community once again. But I would like to highlight one thing. That's a good beginning, but at the same time, we should understand that our canopy has two problems. The first one is about preservation, and the second one is about planting. So those problems are separate, but we need to face them together at the same time, because knowing what has been planted, at the same time knowing what has been cut, will give us information about the status of our canopy. So this motion is something very good that you bring, Councillor Good. Thank you very much. I'm going to support it, and it's a good beginning. I hope we're going to go further about knowing what we need has information about planting. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to support it. Certainly, no politician in his right mind is going to stand up against a tree. But the one thing that I like in particular is the last part that says collaborative with community partners and stakeholders. I'm not a builder, but when I've talked to builders, sometimes clear cutting is what they need to do to get houses built. The last time I checked, we've talked about a housing crisis, a housing shortage, and so I'm not completely enamored with the idea of putting restrictions on builders to stop them from building houses. So I'm interested in what the report will say, what our stakeholders and community partners, builders in particular, have to offer in terms of perhaps some kind of a compromise or some kind of in-between. While I'm certainly not a fan of seeing giant chunks of forest swept away, I'm also not looking to try to impede builders from doing something that we need them to do right now. So I'm interested in what the report has to say. I like the fact that we're going to meet with them and say, okay, what can we do to let you still build houses and not just completely demolish chunks of forest at the same time. So that's why I'll support the motion.
Further comments? Councillor McIntosh?
Yeah, I agree with Dean on this one. Most important player in this are the guys, we call them stakeholders, the people that are building homes. If I buy 35 acres of property and a lot of it is forested. I would think, I'm not a builder, but I think it would be a challenge to do a site plan with streets, sewers, and know where to pick and choose what trees to keep and not to keep. And believe it or not, there are a lot of people who don't want a tree in their front yard for good reasons. The roots go down into your lateral sewers, whatnot. I hope that this report would come back and suggest that, I think we have a plan now where we do a subdivision, 1 tree per lot has to be, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Fothrop.
Mr. Frothrop?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we try to get 1 tree per door.
Yeah, that's, maybe go a little farther than that. When there's a boulevard, the city plant trees. I'm thinking of Brookdale Avenue. That's great. Those trees we planted, what, 10, 15 years ago are now in full bloom. But there's going to have to be some compromise. We just can't say to builders, sorry, guys, you know, you may own that 35 acres, but we're going to tell you what to build and what not to build. So I have confidence that the report will come back and, you know, good discussion with the builders.
Mr. Paulo?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to raise this because this is a very complex issue. And I've said this before, it's not as complex on the public property, because I think we do a very good job of tree planting, but it's a complex issue on private property. For example, the city owns probably the greatest forests in our business park, which we then sell, which then get clear cut. And sometimes when you have bylaws that penalize, you're selling land to someone and then penalizing them. So you have to really think about all of those issues whenever you're dealing with this. And I do support what we're trying to do here, because we do need to have something. But I'm just pointing out that, and I'm happy to work with the stakeholders, and it's the developers and those who are, you know, very concerned about the environment. It's everybody. So stakeholders for me is everybody in the community partners. It's already been talked about that really drainage is what drives somebody, Councillor Bennett, like the individual who clear cut because the drainage was felt to be necessary to get rid of that tree, because the tolerance on the tree for soil against it is not very good. And so they clear it and then hopefully try to plant some trees. But I just want to, in terms of time frame, I think this is going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take staff to work with the partners and the builders and so on. And so I would expect that it could be a 3-month time frame.
Thank you. Further comments? Councillor Good?
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the feedback from Mr. Boileau. I don't anticipate that this will come without challenges. Certainly, there's a lot of interest to balance. And I think 3 months, honestly, even 6 months, as long as we know that it's coming, that it's being worked on, I think that is the key message. Certainly, the intention is not to halt development, because we do need development. But as Councillor Bennett mentioned and highlighted a few properties, I think all of us driving through the community have seen plots of land that have been clear cut years ago and left vacant. I don't even want to get into the erosion and all of the environmental impacts. We know this. I'm very pleased to hear the feedback from the councillors across the table, and I appreciate that this will be a delicate matter to deal with, and I'm confident that you will come back to us with something that will sufficiently meet the needs of both, of all the stakeholders, I should say. So thank you.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Bylaws 2023 49, 51, and 52 listed on the agenda are being presented to council for adoption.
Motion, Councillor Bennett, seconder. Councillor McDonald. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
We are now at the reports from standing, advisory, special, and ad hoc committees of council, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McDonald and Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to know from Mr. Fothrop what the progress has been on the Arts Centre. I understand work has begun.
Mr. Fothrop.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, work has begun. It's been ongoing for the past few weeks. There's probably little for the public to notice from the building exterior. The contractor is working on the building interior, doing the hazardous substance abatement work. That's expected to go on for another couple of weeks. But then soon after that, the public will see some real activity and some progress as the building demolition work will start to take place, and that will be impossible to miss. So the public will see quite a bit of activity there starting within a few weeks.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for giving me the opportunity to do this. My question is, the Jehovah's Witnesses, is there any movement on their coming to Cornwall? This group spends between $2 million and $2.5 million in our businesses per weekend. If they come for 3 weekends, we're looking at almost $7 million. Our businesses were hit hard during COVID, and their being in Cornwall will surely help them survive. Is there any movement on that? And I would ask the recreation manager because of the complex.
Mr. Fothrop.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the Watchtower conventions are returning to Cornwall this spring. We've got them booked for 2 weekends at the Civic Complex. I can't exactly recall the dates. I believe, though, they are June dates, weekends in the coming month of June.
Thank you for that answer. I don't want to make this too long, but the money they spend here on our restaurants and our retail issues, gas stations, it's recorded that it's between $2 million and $2.5 million a weekend. So we're looking at $5 million spent to our businesses in Cornwall. Thanks for that answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to do this.
We have one notice of motion. Now therefore be it resolved that the City of Cornwall create and publish a calendar of community events. And now be it further resolved that the calendar include a form for community members to submit details about their events to be pushed on the calendar. This will appear on the next agenda for debate, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
And a confirming bylaw. So bylaw 53 is being presented to council for adoption.
Motion. Councillor McIntosh, Councillor Bennett, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Motion to adjourn. Councillor McDonald, Councillor Ngunjo, all in favor? Carried, thank you, council. Good night, bonsoir.